Hey everybody, this is attorney Andy Marcantel, and I am a criminal defense and civil rights attorney for the Attorneys for Freedom law firm. If you don't know about our firm, we have offices in Chandler, Arizona and Honolulu, Hawaii, and I am certified to practice in both states. Now, as the name implies, we are a hardcore pro-freedom activist law firm with many high-profile cases that you've probably seen in the news in both criminal defense and in civil rights. We fight the government all day long, and oftentimes we take cases, as we like to call it, just for the freedom of it, right? If it gives us a chance to promote personal liberties in our community. Well, today I'd like to weigh in on a highly controversial topic, to say the least, which is this increasing public outcry to defund the police. So I have a lot to say about this topic, as you'll no doubt soon discover. But I think first, as a preliminary matter, we should do something that, unfortunately, not enough people are doing, not only with this subject, but just the political and social climate in general, which is let's make sure that we're using the same terms. Let's get our terminology straight. What exactly is meant by defund the police? If you don't start with a position of common understanding, two people with differing viewpoints may just be talking past one another. So, for example, some people are saying, when we say defund the police, we are not literally talking about disbanding the police. Don't be ridiculous. Of course we need police. What we're talking about is maybe diverting funds from police departments to different organizations, or perhaps we're talking about demilitarizing the police. Let's give them less responsibility, less power. And still others are saying, no, when we say defund the police, we literally mean abolish the police, right? We need to get rid of police entirely. All cops are bastards, just inherently, without exception. And any of the good cops are simply just complicit in the wrongdoings of the bad cops, either by with silence or by direct action. So with all of these different definitions of the term defund the police, I'd like to throw a new one into the ring. And there's actually a sense of this phrase, defund the police, that I would advocate for, that isn't really encapsulated by any of the positions that I just laid out. I agree with the term defund the police insofar as what it means is to defund the status quo in order to create a paradigm shift in law enforcement. In other words, we need to rethink what it means to be a police officer. And importantly, when and if this paradigm shift actually can occur, I believe we need to heavily fund the police. So in order to understand what I'm getting at here in these concepts, let's start by taking a look at what it means to be a police officer in society today. Well, frankly, it's an incredibly difficult and completely undesirable job in many senses, especially obviously in the current social climate. This is why we're seeing an exodus in many police departments right now. The pay to be a police officer, which is set by the government, of course, is abysmally insufficient to attract our best and our brightest in our society. Now, obviously, there are some intelligent and capable people who become police officers, but just as with any low-paying and difficult career, just on average, the more talented and successful people in our society are going to forego that job for a higher paying and less dangerous one. It's just basic economics. Police officers often hold people's lives in their hands. So let's compare a police officer's job to other careers where you're essentially holding people's lives in your hands. It's pretty damn easy comparatively to become a police officer, right? Here in Arizona, all you need is a high school diploma or a GED. Police academy usually takes in between 4 and 6 months, somewhere in there. And then after you've done those things, high school diploma, and then about 6 months, maybe a little less, of training in a police academy, they then hand you a gun and a badge, and they send you out into the world with just an immense amount of power over people's lives. And, besides the obvious powers, such as being able to wield deadly physical force and being sanctioned by the government to do that, even the power just to charge somebody with a crime is often an immensely life-changing decision that an officer has to make. Now, take it from a criminal defense attorney who has represented many hundreds of people over the years. If you're even charged with a crime, you've already lost. And that's even if it's just like a misdemeanor, a low-level crime. And that's even if it's ultimately dismissed. Because you're going to have to pay legal fees potentially, you're going to have to take time off of work to go into court, there's going to be a giant amount of stress in defending a case. It can oftentimes last for months as it slogs its way through our sometimes inefficient justice system. If you've ever been charged with a crime, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's the first thing you think about when you wake up in the morning, and it's the last thing you think about before you go to sleep. I mean, this is an immense life-altering power to have, the discretion to charge people with crimes. And we're giving it currently to people who have a high school diploma or a GED and 4 to 6 months of police academy training. Now, really serious felony crimes must be brought by prosecutors, true, but the majority of the time, just from my experience, the prosecutor just tends to follow the charging recommendations of the arresting officers. So they're many times, unfortunately, just kind of rubber stamping the police officers' charging recommendations without critically looking into it. And then there's exceptions to that, but by and large, that tends to be the case for most felonies. Now, in addition to the deficiencies of the initial requirements to become a police officer that we've been talking about, there's also another huge problem that we don't talk about as much, which is the continued training of police officers throughout their career. And I believe that continued training for officers under the status quo is woefully deficient in two main categories. The first, we'll call these two categories the legal training and then the physical mental training. Okay, let's talk about legal training. Unfortunately, many officers out there are operating off roughly what the criminal code was at the time that they became an officer. So whatever they learned in police academy at the time, basically. So imagine if you were a police officer that became an officer in 2010, you may be out on the beat every day with a general bias towards enforcing the 2010 criminal code. Well, just think about how much the law has changed in so many ways since 2010. I mean, just for example, look how much different marijuana law is in the states these days than it was back in 2010. Now, for somebody like a doctor or a lawyer, for example, for us to maintain our certifications and be able to continue to practice law every year, we're required to take hours each year. We got to report to some sort of an agency. We've got to report a certain amount of hours of continued education, continued training, getting up to date on the ever-changing and dynamic legal code. I mean, this makes perfect sense, right? Because these fields are changing all the time, and our training should be constant and reflect that dynamic nature of the code. And there's plenty of professions that have this constant training. Now, it's true that some police officers do receive continued legal training as laws adapt, but it's often pretty times lacking and superficial, as I've discovered from interviewing many police officers over the years. It's basically surface level stuff. It's the stuff you need to know basically just to know enough to issue citations. Let's talk about the other way that continued training is lacking for police departments. Physical training, right? It's not subject to the continued standards of excellence that we may want for somebody in that position. We're probably all have encountered or familiar with the stereotypical kind of overweight, maybe aging, donut eating kind of police officer who quite evidently is not capable anymore of hopping the fence and chasing the bad guy. They've probably joined the force when they were in the best shape of their life, peak physical and mental health, maybe in their early 20s. But over the years, because of a lack of constant training and constant having to keep a certain level of physical fitness and mental health, maybe they've slipped into a standard that is less than ideal for somebody who's practicing that job. Keep in mind, they're paid to protect us. And if they're not physically capable of chasing or restraining the bad guys, not only are they not going to be able to fulfill their job title, but also it's going to lead inevitably to more unnecessary uses of deadly physical force, right? Because they're going to feel in those situations where they're incapable of physically and non-lethally restraining a suspect, they're going to feel like going to the gun or going to escalating the force is their only option, right? So it's going to lead to more unnecessary uses of deadly physical force. So with all of these problematic features, the government then compounds the problem further by giving these officers qualified immunity. Qualified immunity. Now, take it from me. I work at a law firm where we regularly sue the government for civil rights violations. It is difficult. It is extremely difficult to sue a police officer successfully. I mean, even in our most high-profile cases, even in our nationally publicized cases where the public is just overwhelmingly outraged about the conduct of the officer. Maybe we have like a video or something showing the officer killing a person unlawfully or using serious physical force to injure them horrendously, unnecessarily, and illegally. Even in these cases where it's all caught on camera, it's still immensely difficult to sue a police officer successfully because of this concept of qualified immunity. Now, whenever you go to war against the government in the courtroom, you're facing an opponent that essentially has unlimited resources. They can throw miles of red tape in your way. They can just burden you with interrogatories and things like that in the process to make it difficult for you to proceed. And at any time, the court can simply bounce or dismiss the case under various immunity doctrines. So it's extremely difficult to sue police officers. And of course, that all leads to lacks of accountability for bad police officers. It's certainly understandable, given all of these deficiencies, that this often sows public distrust in the institution of law enforcement. So imagine what it would look like if we could rethink the police in order to address all of these problems that I'm talking about. We would really need to change what it means, fundamentally, what it means to be a police officer. First and foremost, okay, here's a preliminary issue. We're going to have to attract better people to the position. We need to be attracting the best and the brightest in our society. We are not currently doing that. So we need the people also, in addition to being the most disciplined and intelligent and competent, we need people who are physically fit and athletically competent so that they can withstand the rigors, the physical rigors of the job. And guess what? In order to do these things, in order to attract these types of people, we're going to need to actually make it a desirable career. Bottom line, we're going to need to pay them way more than we should. It should be at least a six-figure starting income so that the people that the career attracts are competent and intelligent and mentally stable and disciplined. We need to require real substantive legal training, comparable to other professions in the criminal justice system who are holding people's lives in their hands. Something like a law degree or a criminal justice certification. Maybe training in constitutional law, right? Knowledge of the constitutional rights of the citizens that they're dealing with every single day while they're out on the job. So let me illustrate this point in particular with reference to my own field of expertise. As I mentioned, I'm a criminal defense attorney, and my job is to represent people who are charged with crimes and hold the government accountable not only to their burden of proof, but also their burden to respect the constitutional and statutory rights of my clients. So for all of our systems faults, and that's kind of a different subject, but for all of our legal systems faults, we have a really beautiful principle in our criminal procedure. And that principle states that, there are some things that we value even more than the question of, is that particular defendant guilty or innocent? So, for example, let's say that a cop kicks in a door, right? Kicks in a door, no warrant, no probable cause, totally in violation of my client's Fourth Amendment rights to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, and rummages through his things totally illegally, but then finds a little baggie with a green leafy substance that's illegal in his jurisdiction. And he says, hey, look, factually, he has the drugs. Factually, he's legally guilty. Well, the court says, sorry, you were supposed to have probable cause and have enough evidence to go in to do that search. And there are some things, Mr. Cop and Mr. Prosecutor, that are more important in our society than the question of whether they're literally or factually guilty. So what the court's going to do is they're going to say, Fourth Amendment violation, right to privacy violation going on. We're going to throw out the evidence and essentially throw out the case against that defendant. The idea is that if we don't hold the government to this burden, to say that the police can simply do whatever the hell they want as long as they find something, right? Well, that's the fastest way to a completely tyrannical society. And my role as a defense attorney is to hold the government accountable in this way. And it's truly indispensable for a just society. But as a member of the community, I don't want real bad guys to go free because the cops were incompetent and screwed something up in the investigation, right? Imagine in the scenario that I just described that instead of the green leafy evil marijuana plant, the illegally obtained evidence was a bloody knife that would have proved a real legitimate murder. And now it's going to get thrown out in the evidence and decrease the chances of a conviction because the cop screwed up a major part of the investigation. So for my clients, I'm going to always zealously discharge my duty to ensure that they have a scrupulously aggressive defense. And after all, that's required. The higher the standard of the defense bar, the better the government has to be in order to get their convictions. And when I reveal a real constitutional violation because the cop screwed up, the government does deserve to be punished for it, which in many cases causes them to lose that conviction. But when it comes to real bad guys, you want me to win on these types of issues as little as possible because you don't want real bad guys, real cases getting thrown out because of police incompetence. So if police had a full and complete legal education on the justice system, right, and criminal procedure like I was talking about, these instances where serious cases get thrown out because of screw-ups would happen much less. It would improve society. We'd get real actual bad guys. The officer would know the relevant burdens of evidence required before acting, before kicking into that door, right? This would lead to less unlawful intrusions, which do nothing but fuel the fires of tension in many of these communities. We need to focus on ensuring not only legal competence of the police, but also physical and mental competence too, right? We need recurring physical examinations to make sure that these officers out there are capable of performing their jobs. They need to be physically fit enough to successfully restrain people and use non-deadly physical force when the situation allows for it. There need to be recurring mental examinations, right? People can develop mental issues later in life, past their prime when maybe they got involved in law enforcement, especially in a high-stress job like being a police officer. So we need to regularly screen for mental competence. Now, if officers aren't meeting the standards of quality, there needs to be some kind of a mechanism to quickly remove them from that position of power, or else we will inevitably see blatant abuses. So what does this all boil down to? We need to rethink and restructure what it means to be a police officer in this country. The police department should be comprised of the brightest and best among us, the most physically and mentally competent among us. They need to have a real understanding of the law, not just the superficial understanding required to give citations and charge people with crimes. They also need to have the strength of body and mind to withstand the pressures and stresses of the job, high intelligence, physical prowess. Basically, police officers should be the warrior poets of our society. This is the only standard that makes sense given the immense amount of power that police wield in our society, right? Our standards for what it takes to become a police officer and remain a police officer are completely out of whack with the importance of being a police officer and the power that they wield. And those two things are out of whack for a cop, probably more so than any other profession in our entire society. When people hear that I'm a lawyer, they should respond, "Oh, you're only a lawyer. Okay, so you couldn't hack it as a cop." Because cops need to be well-rounded in every single sense of the word. So if you're also convinced that we need to see a major paradigm shift along the lines of what I'm talking about, the next question is, well, how the heck do we do this? How do we create a police force full of warrior poets? It sounds too expensive or impractical. Well, the answer, like many things, is profoundly simple. We need to allow communities to privatize their police departments. We need to end our incompetent government's monopoly on force, and we need to subject the police to the forces of the market. Like anything else subject to the market, the inferior services will not survive. And to illustrate this point, imagine if your community could fire your police department. They could fire your police force. Imagine, for example, that your police force has numerous complaints for police brutality or racial profiling, or just pick your issue, pick your problem that you see with law enforcement today. And then all it would take at that point is for another police company to come in with a better service. Oh, okay, so you guys are experiencing police brutality over there with your current company. Well, check out the extra training and certifications and education that we require of our police officers to work for our company. For example, we require more legal training. We require twice as many annual physical and mental exams to screen out for unstable or unqualified people. We have a more strict no tolerance policy for improper conduct. The inferior service, in this case, wouldn't stand a chance, right? That community would immediately fire their current police and hire the new one in a heartbeat. The market would increase the quality of the service like it does everything through the same principles why we went from having a flip phone to this supercomputer that we all keep in our pockets nowadays. It's because of the market forces. It's opening these things up to competition. Competition breeds innovation. In order to stay in business, that crappy police department we were talking about, they're going to have to shape up and change dramatically, or they're done. And if the new police department with the superior service takes over, if another police department comes along offering even more qualified, wonderful certifications, well, that's going to be that. They're going to have to constantly compete for these communities' businesses. So let's talk briefly about some interesting issues of application of police privatization. And, keep in mind, this is new ground we're going to have to plow in a lot of ways. Not entirely new ground, because we all know what it's like to have private security in different establishments in different places. It's just on perhaps a more significant scale. Frankly, these are going to be exciting and interesting conversations to have, and reasonable minds are going to differ, but we need to start having these conversations. For example, issue number one that I can think of is, how big should a given hiring community be? In other words, what's the size of the community customer that patronizes a private police department? Well, currently we have police departments in cities and municipalities, counties, and so on. But I could imagine it going all the way down to the size of neighborhoods. Maybe something like a homeowners association chooses to patronize certain law enforcement companies. Or maybe it makes more sense, given how travel is much more common in interstate, to expand the size of the community that this private police force serves. Of course, if there's advantages to the size of the hiring community, the market's going to correct for that. These private police enterprises could perhaps be certified for quality by trusted or even nationwide quality control organizations, just like we already do, right, in so many industries. Private, respected nationwide organizations could certify like the health and fitness programs of police departments. Maybe even an organization like the American Bar Association could accredit a private police company just like it would a law school, saying, yeah, we've looked at it. These guys, they have a curriculum for these officers that is up to par on legal training. It looks like they've covered Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Sixth Amendment. Looks good to us. That would be excellent. Given how deficient, for example, police non-lethal takedowns or grappling methods have proven to be. I don't know if you've ever watched any of these videos where martial arts experts are watching in horror as police completely miff how to interact with people and restrain people physically, or wrestling with a suspect incompetently. Wouldn't it be awesome if one of these private police departments could come along and say, you know what, all of our officers, one of our perks if you want to hire us, all of our officers have at least a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and our program has been certified by a well-respected national Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu organization to guarantee that they're going to be able to do more non-lethal non-lethal takedowns. What a great perk that would be. One argument I don't buy, though, at this point, maybe you've been kicking it around in your head, is perhaps that there's simply not enough people out there that could meet these high standards, right? Andy, how many warrior poets in our society do you think there are? There's just simply not enough people. So a couple things I have to say to that. First of all, I just don't agree with it on a fundamental level. There are plenty of lawyers out there, for example, who are physically fit enough to chase the bad guys, just as there are many athletes out there that are smart enough to earn a law degree, right? You're not going to sell me that there's insufficient numbers of those. But, just think of the wide range here. There's probably calm and collected surgeons out there that could apply their ability to act under pressure to help de-escalate tensions in inner city neighborhoods. We just need to restructure the job so that it actually attracts these types of people. Don't aspire to be an astronaut. I mean, that's great and everything. Aspire to be a police officer. That requires you to be mentally and physically fit, and you'd be well respected accordingly, because the position of the job would actually mean something at that point. They don't just hand out badges and guns. You got to earn that thing. It leads me to my last point. Keep in mind that if, on this subject of, how many of these people are we going to need? This new restructuring of the police, how many people are going to be required to service these communities, and are there going to be enough people? Keep in mind, if we eliminate nonsensical, victimless, subjective morality-based crimes from our penal code, there's going to be significantly less need for officers in every community. Yeah, I'm talking about something like the drug war, that horrible, immoral, failed experiment that needs to be abolished. We could have the best, most efficient police officers in the entire world, but if the laws they are enforcing are fucked up and immoral, we're never going to get a just result. Every single time that a door is kicked in because of a drug raid or a victimless morality-based crime like gambling or prostitution or something like that, tensions rise in a given community. And guess what? When doors get kicked in, that's when tragedies tend to occur. Bullets fly. People die over stupid shit that shouldn't be illegal in the first place. And eliminating such crimes from our penal code would benefit the justice system on every single level, from arrest to pretrial to trial to the incarceration system. Every single level would be benefited by eliminating these victimless, morality-based crimes. And not the least of which would benefit from this is law enforcement. I want to thank you guys all for listening to my opinions on these particular issues. I hope that I've convinced you that our society needs some sort of a paradigm shift in the area of law enforcement. Or even if I've just encouraged you to examine some of these topics a bit more critically, I'll gladly take that too. This has been Andy Marcantel. I'm an attorney with the Attorneys for Freedom law firm. Feel free to reach out to us directly at attorneysforfreedom.com. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, guys.